Next, we have Richard Spang from, he's an environmental supervisor with Westmoreland Rosebud Mining, and Corey Baker, he's an environmental consultant with WESTECH Environmental Services out of Helena, Montana. And they're both going to talk to us about reclamation and soil handling options. With that, can you please welcome these two gentlemen? That big drop. Wow.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking around. We know it's tempting on the last day to sleep in or hit the road early, so it's nice to have some folks to talk to. We thought maybe it'd just be an empty room, so thanks for sticking around. So what we're going to talk about here is really the idea came from looking at some different soil handling options at the Rosebud mine. And we're not going to get too far into the specifics of it, we're not going to throw any real numbers at you or anything like that. We're just looking at kind of how did this project that we're working on come around, and also go back a little bit into the discussion of how do we get here for specific soil handling. And so this project is with us and with the folks at Westmoreland, and also want to acknowledge, and we will later too, the folks at DEQ have been really helpful. We've been collaborative with them and working through the study plan and trying to come up with some ideas that work. We'll get into that later. So this will be a two-part presentation. My part, I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit of the history of soil handling and how we're doing this. I do want to say that a lot of times at this conference, there's been a lot of stuff on hard rock mine and particularly. And so particularly the Westmoreland guys and other coal companies have started showing up in the last few years. So we kind of wanted to present something that just, talks about mining in general and some of the differences between hard rock and coal. The same idea, but really different in terms of scale, in terms of on-the-ground disturbance a lot of times. So that was one of the things that the objectives of this presentation is to kind of present that to you guys, so folks that we're all on the same page and kind of understand where we're coming from. And I will warn you, I do have some regulatory stuff I want to go over. There's only 3 slides. We'll all get through it together. It's not going to be that bad, but I think it's helpful for telling that story about the differences in mining. And then also looking at some research, some of the stuff that was done in the past and some of the stuff that's being done now in terms of reclamation. This is we're all building off of stuff that was done before, so that's what we're working on now. And then Rich, I'll hand it over to Rich later, and he's going to talk about some of the work they're doing out there at Rosebud, and then a pilot project that we're working on out there. And so that, with the pilot project, those guys we're going to look at what they're doing now for soils handling. We're also going to talk about some of the analysis we're going to do, which is using some of the existing data. These guys have been mining for a long time. They have a lot of reclamation out there, and they've done a lot of different stuff. And so we're going to dig into some of that data. And then we're going to do some on-site trials. We are doing some on-site trials to see how this stuff works, and then we'll build on those trials, hopefully, to scale them up. So to start off with, I just want to go over some basic reclamation stuff. We're all talking about it in here. There's lots of different parts to doing reclamation at any particular mine site or any particular project. And so these are kind of the main steps that we're talking about. And the soil salvage is the first one that what we have up here. But I want to also say, before a lot of these things, particularly in coal mining, you guys will see this later, the baseline study work is really important. Everything's based off of that. So you're estimating your volumes, your depths, and all that stuff off of your baseline work. So you have to have a good baseline in order to get to, estimate your salvage depths and how you're going to handle your soils. So mainly we're going to talk about soil salvage stuff, respreading those soils, and then we're going to jump ahead to the final bond release, because that's essentially how we're going to evaluate what's working and what's not. So first of all, what's the goal of reclamation? How do we define that? How do we figure out what that is? And it's, defined by mine laws. We got different laws for different types of mines. And then the bonding is how we're making sure all that stuff's going to work, and the proposals are going to, the reclamation is going to work like we think it is. So for the hard rock side of things, we have a bond review cycle where we're looking at these things. We have a reclamation plan where we outline this stuff. The definitions of success are different. This is kind of what I want to point out. You know, in hard rock mining, it's comparable utility and stability, and we'll get into that here in a minute. But it can also be influenced by other permits. If you're looking for a quantitative number, sometimes a stormwater permit where you're looking at 70% of the adjacent vegetation, that's what you're trying to establish. And then we jump over to the coal mining, and it's just a different set of rules. And so in that world, in terms of reclamation, there's 4 stages of bond release. And so the first is regrading your spoils and getting your post-mine topography. Second phase is respreading your soils and seeding it. And then making sure that things are making sure you're headed the right direction. And then we get to the phase 3 part, which is where you're quantitatively looking at your vegetation, making sure you got diversity, production, good cover, you know, depending on what your post-mine land use is, what your objective is. And then the last stage is hydrology, and I will not be talking about that one because that's not my area of expertise. We're going to focus on phase 2 and phase 3. So phase 2 is qualitative assessments of what's going on out there, taking pictures. We're looking at, is the site stable, and do we have something growing? Do we have things growing that we want? And then phase 3, we're actually going out and taking measurements. In the coal world, you have to wait 10 years before you can apply for bond release. So you can start monitoring before that to make sure you're getting what you need and you're going to meet bond release criteria. But you can't apply for that bond release until 10 years after you seed it. And then you have to do some statistical comparisons to make sure it's working. And that those statistics are compared against either a reference area, or most mines now have technical standards that were based on baseline data that we're comparing to. So that's our goal. That's where we're going. And I just want to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about how the soils handling part of this came out in the regulations. Again, I was not around for this part of it, so I've just been talking to folks that were there and were working on this stuff, particularly in the 70s. So before 1960s, at most mines, you weren't salvaging soil for reclamation. Just, you know, I'm sure some people were, but it wasn't regulated and it wasn't necessarily a common activity. The 1972 Constitution, I read somewhere that it was mentioned in there, so I dug through that Constitution and did find, they do say you have to reclaim, you know, mine sites, but there's no real standards, there's no numbers to it. It just lays the groundwork for doing that. And there's probably other people in here that can speak to that much more clearly than I can. But I was glad to, you know, kind of track this down and see how it came together. And then with the Strip and Underground Reclamation Act, then that was apparently very contentious. The soils handling was contentious, and you could see why. I mean, you want to make sure you got good reclamation. We're trying to make sure that these sites are going to be reclaimed, but then it's also an operational question. I mean, you got to handle soils and you know, large volumes over large areas, and so it was apparently a fairly contentious topic. And then it also came up again when the state program went to OSM to talk about federal regulations and approving the program. So here we are. These are the 3 slides I warned you about. These are the regulations. We're going to get through them. But I wanted folks to see where these came from. So these are from Hard Rock rules, and I highlighted some words in here that I think will be helpful as we start talking about the differences between these. And so these regulations do essentially say the same thing. It's just they're worded differently, obviously, and then there's different standards applied. And so for Hard Rock, we can kind of sum this up into, you're going to salvage your soils, you're going to make sure your vegetation is commensurate with your post-mine land use. And then this last one is the important one. You want reclamations that's comparable in utility and stability to the adjacent or to the undisturbed. So you have to figure out what that definition means and make sure you can apply that. Make sure, you know, you can really say that with a straight face when you're going to look at, you know, saying, yes, we did successfully reclaim this area. And we've seen lots of photos in the past few days where that's clearly true. I mean, people have great vegetation cover. It always comes down to those ones that are kind of right in the middle, right? That's where these rules get tricky. You know, if you got a slam dunk, it's easy. But if you have one if you have one where nothing takes, but those ones in the middle. So that's kind of what you worry about when you're looking at these. And so now we're going to jump over to coal mine. And so this is for the reclamation plan part. So this is doing your mine planning. This is doing permitting. And so this is the type of information, and obviously this is paraphrased. There's a lot more in there. But this is the type of information that you're collecting, you're planning for when you're laying out a mine permit, the reclamation part of the mine permit. And again, there's some key points here, And the difference here with this is that instead of saying we're going to salvage soil and we're going to use it, you actually have to say how much of each soil type you're going to use. You have to have a really good soil map, and you have to know what soil type, what soil depths you want to use, and then calculate your volumes from those soil depths. So you need to know a lot of this information going into the mine process so that you can then apply it when it comes to reclamation. And so now we're in the rules of the soil handling. So what we're doing when you're actually mining. And I did flip-flop these, which is apparently why the lineup isn't the lines through the words, but the redistribution of soil I put first because I want to talk about the next one last. And so in that one, we want to redistribute the soil so that it's appropriate for the post-mining vegetation. But we just saw in the last one, you actually know what that's going to be ahead of time. In your reclamation plan, you know what your soil depths are going to be, you know what your volumes are. But the removal of soil is the one that we're really digging into now. This is the one that we're looking at and trying to figure out how to remove the soil. And currently in Montana, it's a 2-lift soil system. So you take topsoil and you take subsoil. Unless, and this is the part we're looking at, is unless we think we can do it with just a single lift. And you can see why operationally that would be advantageous as long as you can get the reclamation you're looking for. So before we get into that in any more detail, just want to show a couple pictures here. These are from the mine. You're separating the A and the B. It's pretty straightforward. Again, I said there'd be no math, and there isn't really. These numbers can be different depending on what kind of soil type you have. So you're trying to isolate these, but it's, you look at these photos and you think, okay, you just got to scrape up, topsoil and scrape up subsoil, but you have to maintain separation of those all the way through. So you salvage them separately, you stockpile them separately, and you respread them separately. So from a sequencing standpoint, that gets to be tricky. And you have to have area to store these soil stockpiles. And so some of them can be acres, in size just for the stockpiles. And they can be helpful. I mean, there are places where you have low quality subsoils, and so burying those deeper can be useful. And you can also get some regeneration from your native seed bank in the topsoil. And I think the argument we would have is that at Rosebud anyways, the subsoils there's not a problem with the subsoils in general. And the germination from the native seed bank you would still get with a single lift is our theory. So now we're going to the research that went into this. We talked about some of the regulations before. So then in the 70s, with coal mine in particular, people were looking at vegetation, and it was often focused on production, cropland type production, and then looking at different soil salvage depths. So they'd use wedge studies where they'd lay down a gradient of soil depths, seed it, and then see what would grow there. And the results would show mixed results for the perennial grasses in general. I think they could get them to grow on different depths of soils. The 2-lift, it seems to me it came from really when it came to crop yields. You would get higher crop yields with a 2-lift system than with the single lift. And I should say, I think at this point, we're not looking at doing single lift for crop field. This is just for like rangeland, upland type stuff. And then, so in your soil depths, you got a range there that works. Putting down more soil doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get better reclamation. And you also want some variability in there because shallower soils, you can get shrubs. And it's nice to have some variation on the landscape, which is what you'd see in the adjacent anyways. So digging into a few recent studies, and these were from Canada. These were focused more on non-crop type vegetation, and their objective was to blend it with the landscape. And they were really looking at efficiency of soil salvage, so more of a resource use, I think, with some operational considerations. If we can just salvage this one time, can we get where we need to be? Can we get across the finish line in about the same time, just using a single lift system? And the results were, again, trying to maximize your salvage. So they were looking at slopes and trying to find gentler slopes you were able to get more efficient soil salvage on. And some of them say, the deeper you go, the more rocks you hit. And as you guys know, if you hit rocks, you really lose efficiency on your soil salvage. So there were some arguments there. Of course, that would be site specific. 10 to 20 inches is usually, seems like what folks needed in order to get rangeland grasses to grow. And the less handling and the less driving over it, you'd have less compaction. And you'd also increase that variability, because with that single laydown, you might get more variability than you would in a two-pass system where you're laying down two layers of soil. And some regression they looked at was that things like rock content or aspect actually had more influence on reclamation success than the soil laydown. So it's an important component, but it doesn't necessarily tell the story. So with that, I'll hand it over to my friend Rich here, and he's going to talk about some of the work we're doing out at the Rosebud mine.
Thanks, Corey. Good morning, everybody. Been at Rosebud since 1998. Was a shift supervisor for a while. Went back to engineering and environmental. That's kind of where we're at today. I joke with everybody. I've been out in the field so long. I came up with this idea. Can we use a single lift at the Rosebud mine? And here we are today. I got a hold of Corey a while back. Been working with him for years. Brought him in, and like I said, here we are. Okay, for starters, the mine opened up in 1968. Obviously pre-law. That at the time that was for the coal for the locomotives. And after the diesel come around, that mine shut down. If I remember right, Montana Power bought the reserves, and then that's when the coal mine started after that. The pre-law was, I think it was released, I want to say mid-2000s, phase 4, or phase, at the time it might have been phase 3 bond release, but currently we have 5 active permits. We're 40,000 acres. 19,000 acres are disturbed, 11,500 reclaimed. As Corey mentioned, the soil handling volumes per year, that's a pretty significant number. If you think about it, when we do salvage the soil, the first top foot is pushed up with a dozer, and the second foot is pushed up with a dozer too. And when they do that, where the strip edge is, to differentiate which is which, they take the topsoil and they put it perpendicular to the strip edge, and then the subsoil is horizontal to the strip edge. And that's a lot of work. And if we can prove to the DEQ that the single lift will work veg-wise, meet phase 3 reclamation, that's a significant savings, obviously. So reclamation, there's 17 post-mine land use types, 4 soils, handling depths. And this shows our reclamation plan here at the Rosebud mine. Just going to point out a few things. The type, we have the lowland and upland, and that's the part we're thinking of trying to get for a single lift push-up. There's 2 post-mine land uses at Rosebud, grazing and wildlife. And if you see there up to the right, for example, the lowlands, we have to have 12 inches of top and 12 inches of sub, so approximately 24 inches. Shrub complex, 18 inches. One thing to point out here in the yellow there, currently we have a single lift, and that's basically for our tree soils. In the skunk bush sumac and also in the conifer. alternative soil handling plan. Here we are. So hypothesis, single lift soil handling reclamation will achieve comparable vegetation to two lift handling reclamation. Methods, analysis of existing reclamation data, on-site trials with various single lift depths, direct haul and stockpile soils. One thing I was going to mention, in Area D, one of our existing permits, when we get ready to close that area out, I can't remember the approximate acres, but we were soil deficient, and what we did is we worked with the DEQ, and what we did is we did a single lift laydown, and it came from topsoil piles, subsoil piles, and then also the haul road that was up in that area, sampled the scoria, sent it to the lab, everything came back fine. So we used that as one of our soils, and that was done in 2016 and 17. And the area looks really great now. I mean, it's coming up great. I think it's in 2026 and 27, as Corey mentioned, at phase 3, 10 years of growing seasons. 9 and 10 will monitor. We'll submit that data to the DEQ, I think in 2028, if I remember correctly. And hopefully that comes back successful and help us push toward our goal for a single lift push-up. Comparison of bond release monitoring data on the analysis. Okay, this is our project status on-site trials. This was done in April of 2021. And we did work with the DEQ on this. This particular area is located in Area C. We had 4 fields, approximately 1.5 acres each. And we proposed 3 single lift depths of 12, 18, and 24, and 1 control, which is a double lift of 9 inches of sub and 9 inches of top. And we used our 2 permitted native seed mixes of lowland and upland. And then also another area, we did a salvage soil. In that map there, it shows in red there that we did the normal 1-in-1 stripping, and then the bluish was a 24 single lift, and so on. That was done in 2022. The plan is in 2027, we're gonna take that soil, lay it down on a regraded area, seed it, and see how that comes out. So with that, our next step, as we mentioned, it's analysis of existing data, the alternate soil laydown, single lift, and subsoil. That's the stuff I mentioned we did in Area D. We'll take a look at that. We'll start monitoring some of the qualitative, which is at phase 2. Usually after 3 years, we can put in for phase 2 if things look okay. The 2026 through 2028, that's the stuff we're going to submit for phase 3, and then implement the stockpile soil trials. With that, as Corey mentioned, give a shout out to DEQ, working with Julian Calabrese and Mike Glenn. For the Rosebud mine, real quick, I give a shout out to Rusty Beatty, is our environmental manager. Tim Garvin, reclamation planner. Dusty Martins, he's our permit engineering supervisor. And our recent hire is Morgan Martins. She's been with us, I think, going on 2 years now. But anyway, hopefully we'll be back here in a couple of years to let everybody know where we're at with this. And hopefully the DEQ pushes things through to help us get this permitted. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rich and Corey.